On the broadcast tonight, The Last Dance, new rehearsal video just released is said to show Michael Jackson in his final days. Also an exclusive NBC News interview, brother Jermaine in his own words. Out of work, hundreds of thousands more jobs disappear as unemployment edges toward a milestone. And what about that recovery? Send in the Marines, a major new push in Afghanistan up against a Taliban stronghold. And deep impact, new details emerging on that Air France flight lost over the Atlantic. What happened in those final moments? Also tonight, you won't believe what they found in England just days away from our 4th of July. Nightly News begins now.
From NBC News World Headquarters in New York, this is NBC Nightly News with Brian Williams.
Good evening. The end of Michael Jackson's life was just the beginning of a legal battle and a logistical and custody challenge that continued today and is going on as we speak tonight. At times, it seems like everyone in the circle around him is working their own angle. The mother of 2 of his children is deciding whether to try to get custody of them, as you'll hear. His concert promoters have released videotape that they say shows him 2 days before death and in fine shape. He is shown rehearsing at the Staples Center in L.A., where his memorial will be held next week. It's where we start tonight with NBC's Lee Cowan. Lee, good evening.
Well, good evening, Brian. It was right here at the Staples Center where Michael Jackson's last moments on stage were captured, so it would be fitting perhaps to have the public memorial here. But with all this talk about Michael Jackson's alleged drug use circulating, today it was the promoter of that 50-concert tour who came out with what it says is proof that Michael Jackson was lucid and healthy. For critics who question Michael Jackson's physical readiness for a big comeback, today his promoters released this as their answer.
Some things in life they just don't want to see. But if Martin Luther was living, they wouldn't let us be no love. All I wanna say is that they don't really care about us. We're deep in fire. All I wanna say is that they don't really care about us. I'm dead to remind you. All I wanna say is that they don't really care about us. All I wanna say is that they don't really care about us. All I wanna say is that they don't really care about us.
Jackson's promoters say that clip from a rehearsal they claim was 48 hours before Jackson died proves that Jackson was not on death's door.
None of us saw this coming.
And if drugs helped him through it, they say, it was a mystery to them.
I mean, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a drug rehab specialist, but I could not tell if he was taking painkillers or other medications, as they say.
But investigators seized bags of prescription drugs, needles, and other medical evidence from Jackson's rented home. So much evidence, the DEA has been brought in to track down just where it's all coming from.
You've got to show that there was some intent here, that was beyond a medical reason to be able to take action.
He felt tremendous pressure.
Michael Jackson's brother Jermaine told the Today Show he knew his brother was dealing with a lot, but if he was using drugs to cope, he says, he hid it from the family.
I really don't know, man. I really don't know, and I'm being honest. I really don't know.
But friends say there was plenty of evidence, and that those around Jackson were enabling his drug use.
If Michael wanted something, nobody said no.
Jackson's former bodyguard says any effort to stop him was met with resistance from Jackson himself.
We went to great efforts to keep the doctors away. But as soon as we said anything and it got back to Michael would have a, screaming fit that we were interfering with his private life.
Jackson's life on stage, friends say, was often different from his life off it. One person described his dancing as muscle memory. It came without thought. For fans, these last images are haunting, not for what they show, but for what might have been.
Hold for applause, slow umbrella fade out.
Now, Brian, back to that custody hearing that you were talking about. We understand that there was some speculation today that Debbie Rowe, the biological mother of 2 of Jackson's children, might actually want them back. There is a court hearing that a judge has scheduled for a week from Monday, where both sides, attorneys for Michael Jackson's mother, Catherine, who has temporary guardianship, and attorneys for Debbie Rowe will meet in court to discuss it. Brian.
Lee Cowan starting us off from the Staples Center in L.A. tonight. Lee, thanks. This morning on Today, Matt Lauer conducted an interview, as you saw, with Michael Jackson's brother Jermaine. We'll hear more from that a little later in the broadcast. First, we turn to tonight's news on the U.S. economy and new numbers that prove what a lot of Americans already know. Employers are continuing to fire and not hire. The unemployment rate now at 9.5%. Hasn't been that high in 26 years. 467,000 more jobs disappeared in the month of June alone. A surprise to a lot of the experts because May hadn't been that bleak. On Wall Street, the Dow, NASDAQ, S&P were way down on today's trading. CNBC's Trish Regan has more on the numbers and some of the real people behind them.
Does everyone have the sheet?
In New York City, some instructions for the newly unemployed.
I'm open up for any questions.
It's become an increasingly popular class. And now, news today that unemployment is at a 26-year high.
It took years for us to get into this mess, and it will take us more than a few months to turn it around.
With the recession in its 20th month, nearly 15 million Americans are out of work.
To really lower the unemployment rate and have broad-based prosperity, we need to see job creation numbers consistently in the 200,000, 300,000 range.
Instead of adding jobs, this economy is losing hundreds of thousands every month before money runs out. Trish Regan, CNBC, New York.
Overseas, major new offensive underway tonight involving thousands of U.S. Marines in Afghanistan. It aimed at a Taliban stronghold and heroin trafficking center. And the U.S. Marines have already paid a price for it. Our Pentagon correspondent Jim Miklaszewski with us from there tonight with more. Hey, Jim, good evening.
Good evening, Brian, and that's right. You know, although there's been little enemy resistance so far, at least one U.S. Marine was killed in combat today. But the 4,000 Marines who stormed into the southern Afghanistan area are there to drive out the Taliban from their stronghold in Helmand province. But it's also the beginning of an entirely new U.S. strategy there in Afghanistan, because once the job is done, instead of leaving, the U.S. Marines are going to set up camp and remain there until Afghan forces can take over the security, which, as you know, Brian, could take a long time. At the same time tonight, U.S. forces have launched an intensive manhunt in eastern Afghanistan for an American soldier kidnapped by Taliban fighters 3 nights ago. Now, it's believed that this soldier mysteriously walked away from his U.S. base without his body armor, without his gun. The Taliban has reportedly asking that the U.S. release any Taliban prisoners they have in exchange for the soldier. But so far tonight, Brian, there's no sign of any movement on either side.
We'll keep watching it all. Jim Miklaszewski at the Pentagon tonight. Jim, thanks. Still a lot of unanswered questions about that disastrous Air France plane crash a month ago. The Airbus A330 en route from Rio to Paris at first just disappeared. We later learned it fell into the Atlantic. Today, investigators in France revealed more about what they think happened to that flight. NBC News correspondent Tom Costello following the investigation, which finds him in Paris tonight. Tom, good evening.
Hi, Brian. Good evening. And in fact, they still don't have the black boxes, thought to be in a rugged mountain range on the bottom of the ocean. Meanwhile, here in Paris today, investigators said that the passengers and crew of Flight 447 never had time to prepare for the crash. Not a single inflated life preserver has been found. More than a month after Air France Flight 447 mysteriously crashed in the Atlantic Ocean, there are still precious few clues into what happened. But the limited wreckage search teams have pulled from the water, including the galley, a lavatory door, jump seats, and the tail, suggest a harrowing final few minutes of flight. Investigators now believe the plane did not break up in air. Rather, it plunged from 35,000 feet to the ocean below, slamming into the water on its belly. Water then exploded everything up and out of the plane, tearing it to shreds.
It appears to have struck the surface of the water in line of flight, in a straight line in other words, with a very high vertical acceleration.
It's It's a popular plane worldwide. More than 300, make that more than 650 A330s are in service. Brian?
Tom Costello in Paris for us tonight. Tom, thanks for that. And still ahead as we continue on this pre-July 4th Thursday night, a surprise find as we approach the start of this Independence Day weekend. It's in the UK. Also, we're continuing to follow the crackdown in Iran. Tonight, our man on the ground there, here with us in our studios in New York. And later, a brother's startling statements. We'll hear more of what Jermaine Jackson told Matt Lauer. It was 3 weeks ago tomorrow that Iran went to the polls in the election that turned that nation upside down. After Iran's rulers called the race early, you'll recall, in their own favor, protesters filled the streets by the hundreds of thousands. The crackdown came, bloody, violent, through it all, night after night. Our Tehran bureau chief, Ali Arouzi, told us what was going on under some very difficult circumstances. He was one of the last journalists for Western media outlets still reporting from Iran. He's here with us now. We're happy to have him here in our New York studios tonight. It is good to see you, especially after the risks you took to report this story. What is your best read on what it's like there now, Ali?
Well, Brian, I think the first phase of this uprising has been squashed. The street rebellions are over, but there's still a lot of discontent amongst the people. The discontent runs very deep and very wide in Iran. We have to see what the next phase of this is going to be. The very powerful clerics like Rafsanjani, who's a moderate, if he's going to hold on to key positions in these bodies of experts that could technically dismiss the supreme leader.
A picture of the young woman named Neda affected us all very deeply. She became an iconic part of this. I get a lot of questions from people. Was that it? Is it now over? Where do you think it goes in the future?
I think it's going to be very hard to roll back this huge wave of emotion and anger that has spilt out onto the streets there. It has been squashed for now. Things are quiet. The streets have returned to some sort of semblance of normality, but this isn't going to go away. And I think in Iran, you've never seen an argument in the establishment spill out into the public like this. And this is the first time it's become very public, this argument. And it's not going to go away very easily. People are still fighting. The opposition is still coming out and saying that this election was illegitimate and it needs to be annulled. So they're still fighting their battle.
It's you and I were talking earlier. It's hard to believe we last saw each other, our last trip in Tehran. We were there to interview Ahmadinejad, and how quickly things have changed.
They've spiraled out of control.
Ali Arouzi, thank you. Thank you for your hard work on our behalf. We're back in a moment with a moment from today on NBC. This morning on Today, we heard a conversation between Matt Lauer and Jermaine Jackson, who, as Michael's brother, was, of course, one of the original members of the Jackson Five. He talked today about the death and the family. Hear now more of that conversation.
Smile, though your heart is aching. Smile, even though it's tough, Matt. You know why? Because you feel him. You feel him in the music. You feel him. He did what he felt from his heart. The fans of mourning is unreal. It's unbelievable.
Jermaine Jackson from his interview this morning with Matt Lauer. When we come back, some things we thought you should know before the 4th. Couple of items before we go tonight and before a number of you run off to get an early start on the July 4th holiday weekend. We hope your travel plans did not involve Chicago O'Hare earlier today. The check-in system at United Airlines failed, and as you may know, Chicago is United's hub. So when the computers there go down, nobody goes nowhere on United. About 100 flights were canceled, leaving a whole lot of people scrambling to get where they wanted to go for the 4th. We already know the winner of the women's final at Wimbledon will be named Williams. No relation. That's because it's Venus against Serena again. Both Williams sisters won their matches today and will now face each other for the championship, just as they did in 2002, 3, and again last year. It airs Saturday here on NBC. There is news about snack food you might not think of a lot until you need one, that is. And if you need a Slim Jim, it may be a good time to get one. Because of a freak accident that killed 3 employees at the ConAgra plant where they make them, production has stopped entirely, and now they expect hoarding among fans as they start disappearing from store shelves. Americans, by the way, ate 181 million Slim Jims last year alone. And a word about our weather. We recognize that not everything revolves around New York, but it is home to 8.4 million people, much more if you expand that up and down the East Coast. And frankly, so far this summer, it's been about the temperature of Finland, and it rains about as often as it does in Hawaii. It rained almost every day in June, several times just today, in fact. Elsewhere, it will be hot in the west this holiday weekend. Sadly, Florida's in for some big rains, some big storms in the plains and Midwest. And how about a patriotic find to send you off tonight? One of the original printed copies of our Declaration of Independence was discovered by chance and gathering dust in an archive in West London. It's one of 26 surviving copies ever. It was found among some old files of letters. We're guessing it might have been the copy that the colonists sent across the pond to the Brits. Just an FYI, we voted for independence. It's been great knowing you. We'll always have Lexington and Concord. Whatever your plans are for the 4th, be safe, enjoy it, remember the meaning of the day, remember the troops, present and past. That's our broadcast for this Thursday night. Thank you for being with us. I'm Brian Williams. We all hope to see you back here tomorrow evening. Good night.